Good evening. I'm Chuck Todd here in Washington. Welcome to MTV Daily, and welcome to what's going to be an extraordinarily busy hour of just good old-fashioned breaking news, Washington style. At any moment, the House will vote on a resolution to terminate President Trump's national emergency declaration on border security. And at any moment, we could see Michael Cohen emerge from behind closed doors, where he's been testifying all day long in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, a committee he's going to jail for lying to. We could also hear from the senators who have been in that testimony. Cohen's closed-door testimony today comes ahead of what's expected to be blockbuster open forum testimony tomorrow. Source tells NBC News that Cohen plans to provide evidence of criminal conduct by Mr. Trump since he became president. We'll see about that. Cohen is also expected to go into detail about the president's alleged racism and cheating by Trump as a businessman. And Mr. Cohen is expected to explain why he, Cohen, lied in a previous appearance before Congress about plans to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. But is there anything Michael Cohen could say tomorrow, including about criminal conduct by the president, that would convince Republicans to break with the president? And that brings us back to this big vote that's about to happen in the House. This vote is about a lot more than a wall. This vote is about how many Republicans could be willing to break away from President Trump when it comes to evidence that he's going around the Constitution, perhaps when it comes to Special Counsel Robert Mueller's ultimate findings. We're not watching to see if this resolution passes a House controlled by Democrats. We're watching to see how it passes. If Republicans aren't willing to rebuke the president for bypassing Congress when he didn't get his way, then it's pretty safe to say they're never going to rebuke him while he's in office. So covering that House vote right now is NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Casey Hunt, and covering all things Michael Cohen is our own Garrett Haake. They join tonight's panel of Heidi Price-Bella, national political correspondent for NBC News, Howard Fineman, NBC News analyst, and Lonnie Chen, a former advisor to Mitt Romney's campaign and currently a fellow, a mighty nice one, over at the Hoover Institute. But Casey and Garrett, I will start with you. And Casey, let me begin with this vote. Walk us through. Is this going to start somewhat on time? Our Republicans have been a full court press all day to try to limit defections. What are we staring at here? What are you watching?
Well, Chuck, I never want to make predictions exactly about the timing of things in the House of Representatives. We have no indication that it's going to be delayed by any significant margin, but then one never really knows. But I think your point is absolutely the right one, which is that the question is how many Republican defections are there going to be? Democrats have been hoping to get about 5 to 10 in the House, but what you've seen all day from leaders has been a full court press to try to keep everybody in their camp. And quite frankly, it's been pretty stunning. It's if you've covered this place for a while,
thank you
and you
for
remember
saying it that way. I'm beyond shocked that leaders of the Republican Party are so brazenly comfortable with going around that they're trying to get their own members not to vote their principled gut here. I'm stunned by how active they're being.
I mean, Chuck, it's nakedly political in an era where people don't seem to be wearing a lot of clothes a lot of the time. And it's if you think about the rhetoric that you heard from these members of Congress, particularly Tea Party members, who are now the president's staunchest defenders, when President Obama was in office, I mean, they screamed about far less when the president was taking executive actions or using executive authority. Now, there's no question, right, that throughout, it really accelerated during George W. Bush's administration. Right. The Congress has been ceding power to the executive. That is not a new trend. However, Republicans had been broadly opposed to this. I mean, how many of them do we have on camera saying, no, this is not what we want? And, I asked Kevin McCarthy this morning what he would say if a Democrat did something like this when they were president. And he said, well, they'd be right within their legal authority. Now, the Senate is still a different story. This is still very contentious, and that's really where the rebuke to the president's going to come. Because listen to how Senator Mitch McConnell answered a similar question. I asked him if this move was legal. Take a look.
Mm-hmm. Do you personally believe that the president's emergency declaration is legal?
Well, that's part of what we were discussing today.
What do you think?
Well, we're in the process of weighing that. The lawyer was there to make his arguments. There were some counter arguments. I haven't reached a total conclusion about, I wouldn't go to me for a simple will. I did go to law school, but we had some real serious lawyers in there discussing that very issue.
So as you
Wow.
can see, he didn't want to say that he thought it was, which I thought was pretty stunning. And it really reflects the discomfort among Senate Republicans with this.
My panel's chomping at the bit here, guys, but I gotta go. And I know we're shocked when we find hypocrisy happening on Capitol Hill. I know it's stunning. But Garrett, I want to check in with you because we've been watching that door carefully. We're learning very little about what Michael Cohen is saying, but have you had any luck prying some information out of some of these members?
Not much, Chuck. We know that this has been a very thorough hearing. We knew that the Senate Intelligence Committee was going to go back through Cohen's original testimony, which was done entirely before staff, and in which we now know that he lied. They were going to go back through that with a fine-tooth comb and review everything. I can't overstate how low the level of trust is here in Michael Cohen, especially on the Senate side here. Remember, he was supposed to come back and do this testimony, a week or two ago, and had to postpone because of his shoulder surgery. The chairman, Richard Burr, didn't even really buy that. I mean, the well has been thoroughly poisoned here. But Cohen's been behind closed doors for 8 hours now, and it could be several more hours based on the conversations I've had with senators as they've come and gone for votes and things like that. And boy, Chuck, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I know we're going to talk about the Matt Gaetz tweet here in a little bit. This is all setting up to be just a blockbuster day tomorrow, but I don't mean that in any kind of positive way. So much more heat than light, likely, and apparently no blow too low. It's just shaping up to be, you have this behind closed doors effort here on the Senate side. The Senate investigation, at least on the Russia issue, has always been the more somber toned one. And now you're going to see this House investigation, this House Oversight Committee hearing tomorrow with some very partisan figures in it. And it looks like it's going to be anything goes.
That's a fair point there. And Garrett, you brought up that tweet. Let me put up the Matt Gaetz tweet. Matt Gaetz, sort of part of the those three amigos of Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, Matt Gaetz. We know he's very tight with Jim Jordan, who's the ranking on oversight. Hey, Michael Cohen, 212. Do your wife and father-in-law know about your girlfriends? Maybe tonight would be a good time for that chat. I wonder if she'll remain faithful when you're in prison. She's about to learn a lot. That is a sitting member of Congress. He actually happens to represent the seat that Joe Scarborough once held in the panhandle of Florida there. Lonnie, I imagine you still consider yourself a conservative.
Yes.
As a conservative, watching all of this, first, where would you vote on this national emergency if you were a member of Congress?
You have to vote against the president. I mean, I don't think there's any question.
If you're a constitutional conservative.
I don't think there's any question that the president has overstepped in this case. I actually think he's going to lose his vote in the Senate. I think with Tom Tillis coming out this morning with the op-ed.
Not a veto-proof loss.
No, but I think enough Republicans are going to vote against the president that it's going to send a very serious signal. Because at the end of the day, people know in their gut where this stands. I mean, you saw Mitch McConnell's discomfort with this. You've seen many others have discomfort with this because you cannot get from where we are now and go back in time and think about all the times that Republicans were against what President Obama did and not think it's hypocritical. And I think that's just going to trouble a lot of these Republicans.
Well, as the resident Mitch McConnell,
you are. You were watching him the way that I imagine, like Sean McVay watches Jared Goff drop back and pass. You were like analyzing every breath he took.
I was fascinated by that because here's the thing about Mitch McConnell. He does consider himself a constitutional law expert. His whole reason for being is to get judges on the federal courts. He says that this is his mission in life and to believe in the rule of law and to believe in the Constitution. And for him to be hemming and hawing like that and visibly, publicly indecisive, I don't know where he's going to come down. I bet you he comes down with the president, but at least he feels he has to agonize over it, which may give room for several senators, as you say, to vote not in veto-proof level, but Republicans to vote against
the Lamars, the Cory Gardners, maybe Johnny
Quite a number. I think it's going to be a bigger number than you expect.
Right, and we've got 18 days now, according to this resolution, according to the rules. If it passes the House today, the Senate has 18 days to vote on it. So the question is, with that stunning display by Mitch McConnell here, where their own leader won't even concede to whether it's even legal, how many other Republicans that pushes? The conventional thinking is that it will not be enough to stop Trump's veto, but it could be enough to send a really strong message.
Casey, I want to combine these two stories a bit here. You got Matt Gaetz and his threat to Michael Cohen. And Garrett, I thought, was absolutely right, that we're in for a blockbuster tomorrow, but not in any sort of positive way, that it's sort of the rules, whatever rules there were, they're gone. The naked partisanship right now, which is basically if you're against Trump, you're against the Republican Party. This tribalism, and I know we keep talking about it, but I think what we're seeing between Matt Gaetz and the tone with Cohen and what we're seeing here, this is tribalism times 1,000.
And Matt Gaetz is out front of this relatively small group of House Republicans that will.
But they're influential. Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows. Right?
You're right. You're right. They seem to be willing to do and say anything to defend this president. And I do think that what you're seeing in other areas, as you tie these together, Kevin McCarthy has decided that that's the constituency that he needs to keep happy. He can't be seen in public bucking this president in any way. And I mean, you had seen Paul Ryan, basically capitulate to them as well repeatedly. But honestly, it feels like we've taken yet another step in that direction, which, perhaps shouldn't be surprising because they're now a larger piece of the GOP conference. On the other hand, Republicans lost an incredible amount of seats in the House, with the country watching what this president has been doing. So it's a little bit of a mixed message. And I think in that way, Senate Republicans represent a more accurate portrayal of what is really going on. I mean, you can see the pressures on them more clearly. And, I think the question is, do we go back to that? Is the decorum that they still try to practice over there really, where our political system's going to be? I'm not convinced because, that tweet from Matt Gaetz, there would have been an era where the idea that a sitting member of Congress would say something like that in public would just be completely beyond the pale. And yet here it is, just one piece of, this is kind of our discourse every single day now.
By the way, I have two pieces of Michael Cohen breaking news. Number one, he's officially been disbarred. That was something we were expecting any minute now. That is there. But he also, a spokesperson put out a statement responding to Matt Gaetz. It's a shame Republicans have resorted to stooping this low and personally attacking Michael Cohen with lies about his personal life. These allegations are absolutely not true. The true story about President Trump's own lies and cover-ups will be told to the world tomorrow. I want to go back, though, to Republicans in the Senate, because Casey made the case that they're more in line of where the party's hand-wringing is. I was fascinated with Tom Tillis's op-ed, Heidi, because he basically made the case if he were the president, he would do this. But as a senator, he has to vote against it. I don't understand that logic. If it's unconstitutional, it doesn't matter whether you reside in the executive branch or the legislative branch. Unconstitutional is unconstitutional. But here's what it really told me. He's afraid to sound like he's against the president.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Chuck, because he's making it pretty clear in his op-ed. If you read into it, he's saying you are busting open the floodgates here for a liberal-leaning president to really take off with this and declare national emergency on guns, on health care, on any number of issues. And by the way, to also expand executive power into reaches that we hadn't previously considered. For example, is this the new Democratic president going to think that they need to add new seats to the Supreme Court? So this sets a very bad precedent. But the fact that he wouldn't just make that call clean in his op-ed, yes, it speaks to the intimidation factor.
Look, I want to give Senator Tillis a little bit of credit.
Could you read that defense of Article 1 there?
I think there are two different issues, right? Yeah. One is the relationship between Congress and the presidency, which is where he hangs his hat. That's where a lot of Republicans are going to end up hanging their hat because it's not directly confrontational to the president. It's sort of an institutional argument. The other question is whether the president has the constitutional authority to declare an emergency in this way. And what he's saying is, yeah, I think the president does. So I don't think it's that inconsistent to argue on the one hand, look, we've got to preserve Congress as an institution. It's the safe place to go. I bet you it's where Cory Gardner's going to end up. Yeah. It's where a lot of these guys who are in Martha McSally, competitive.
Well, Tillis is a 2020 guy.
Yeah,
right? He's a 2020 guy in a swing state.
It's an urgent concern for the 2020 guys.
I'm just trying to imagine what it was like inside the luncheon today.
With Mike Pence making the case, the big broad shoulders.
But McConnell's whole frame of reference is, how do I become Henry Clay II? So he's trying to balance the political needs that he's got against people like Lamar Alexander, I'm guessing, and Tillis probably, and maybe even Cornyn of Texas, not necessarily for constitutional reasons, but for eminent domain reasons along the Texas border. So that's absolutely fascinating. What will happen is that the president will come back from North Korea, and he'll spend the time in that 18 days you're talking about twisting arms and making deals to get those Republicans off the bill.
And tweeting.
All right.
And tweeting.
Always tweeting. All right, panel, pause here. Casey, thank you. Garrett, before I let you go, what do we got? Any news? Anybody else come in and out? Cohen's still there?
They're breaking up for votes right now, Chuck. So there's some foot traffic here. I'm going to go chase some folks down as soon as I get out in front of this camera.
Then it's a good time for us to take a break. Take a break, go find out, and bring them back and yank them to our camera. Casey and Garrett, thank you. Heidi, Howard, and Lonnie, you guys are stuck. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.